my first hero, lived in that cream-coloured house right across the street. He was apprenticed to a surgeon, but he found he couldn't stand the sight of blood, so he set up as a druggist and chemist and set up his next business just here, rather appropriate really, and he invented something so important that millions of them are used every day. The friction match. His name was John Walker. John Walker really is a local hero. Not only is this John Walker Square, but just round the corner there is Walker's Pub. It used to have a John Walker room, but unfortunately it got destroyed in a bit of an argument. Now here on this side of the square is the Matchmaker Brasserie, and I'm hoping to have lunch there afterwards actually. And round here there's an elegant little sort of garden with a plaque, and in the middle of it, on a plinth here, is a bust. Rather nice bust of John Walker. Handsome sort of chap. Unfortunately, it's the wrong John Walker. When they put this up here, they got their sums wrong or their pictures wrong and put up the wrong chap. Oh well, you can't win them all.
In the old days, people used fire drills like this to make fires by friction.
By the time John Walker came along, at the beginning of the 19th century, they had more elegant and sophisticated ways of making fire, and among them the chief was the tinder box. And here is a genuine tinder box with, as you can see, a candle in the top. This was on the mantelpiece, and inside you had a flint and a piece of steel, and then underneath the damper, the tinder, which is actually a lot of old charred rags. They said that charred knickers were the best, so that's what I've got here. And the idea is to get these smouldering. So what you did was to take your steel in one hand and your flint in the other, and you try and strike a spark. That's it. So that one wasn't bad. So it goes down into the tinder. When I'm getting sparks, it's not doing much with the tinder. Anyway, the idea is that if you can get a spark to light the tinder, you then encourage it to smoulder a bit, and then you can transfer the fire to the candle. Well, those are the mechanical methods. Now, let's try some chemistry. Now, because it's chemistry, I'm taking some precautions here, particularly as this first match I'm going to try and make, they called it the Promethean match, included vials of sulfuric acid, and I don't want to get too close to that. And what they did was to take a cone of paper like that, and in it they put a bit of this pyrotechnic mixture, and I'm just going to put a little bit in because I think this might be a bit violent. And then I'm going to take one of these vials and drop that into the middle of the paper, and then we'll fold that up and up again.
Now, I haven't made this up. Promethean matches like this were actually sold for general use.
So now I've got sulfuric acid and my mixture sealed in this. And the idea is that when I break the vial of sulfuric acid, this should catch fire. And the brave lads used to do it with their teeth. Well, I'm not that brave, so I'm going to do it at arm's length over here. So I'm using pliers rather than my teeth. There, it's broken the bulb, and with luck, the acid will come out. There! Look at that! I've got a fire! That's terrific. Now that would obviously be really good for lighting your cigar, particularly if you've done it with your teeth. In 1826, the Promethean match was the state of the art. But then an extraordinary thing happened in John Walker's back kitchen. He was mixing up some chemicals for a percussion cap for his gun. I think he went out shooting ducks or something, and he'd got a bit of antimony sulfide and potassium chlorate. And he left his mixing stick just on the hearth in front of the fire, and in the morning, when he picked it up, by mistake, he scraped it on the hearth, and an extraordinary thing happened. Look at this. He must have scraped it a bit harder than that, I think. It caught fire. And he thought, wow, we've got something really good here. And what's happening is that this mixture of antimony sulfide and potassium chlorate catches fire at a very low temperature. And by rubbing it on sandpaper, or in his case on the hearth, you can make it hot enough to catch fire spontaneously. Now here is my box of John Walker matches, and here is a tin of the old original. This is one of his tins, and he used to sell a tin like this containing 100 matches for 1 shilling and twopence. He called them Sulfurata Hyperoxygenata Frict, and there we are, John Walker matches. They're blue at the end, not orange like mine, because he used a different form of antimony sulfide. And it has been said this invention of the friction match is the greatest invention, or one of the greatest inventions of all time, because he saw a need and filled it, and it hasn't been bettered ever since. The matches we buy today are almost exactly the same. We know from his records that the first matches he sold were on the 7th of April 1827, and in the honour of John Walker, I would like to declare that Day of the Match. This is the River Tyne, slightly less mighty than it is 8 miles downstream in Newcastle. The bridge crosses at the village of Wylam, which amazingly was home to two of the greatest engineers this country has ever known.
You'll probably have heard of my first Wylam hero, George Stephenson, creator of the famous rocket locomotive. He was born here in 1781. George would have seen his first stationary steam engine at Wylam Pit. His dad used to run it, and George went to help out when he was 14. But he had started out as a cowherd.
My next Wylam hero couldn't have had a more different background. His dad was the 3rd Earl of Ross, an eminent astronomer, builder of the world's biggest telescope and president of the Royal Society. He, the son, became a brilliant engineer and built the fastest boat in the world. He lived here at Hollin Hall, and his name was Charles Parsons.
In their castle in Ireland, Charles and his brothers lived a wild life. They had to take pistols for self-protection when they went out to the great telescope at night. They built their own steam carriage to get around the estate, but on one disastrous occasion, a favourite aunt fell off it and died.
These amazing gates were actually rescued by Charles Parsons from an Italian vineyard. When he came up here to the northeast, he acquired a wife and some children, and he built in his house a lab where he could carry on doing experiments. He worked on rocket-propelled torpedoes and incandescent lamps. He worked on the reflecting mirrors behind searchlights and on optical glass for instruments. He spent £30,000 failing to make industrial diamonds by compressing graphite. He took out over 300 patents, and in 1893 he made a steam-powered combined helicopter and aeroplane. But what interests me is his work started in 1884 on the steam turbine.
The original hero, Hero of Alexandria, is supposed to have designed this steam turbine 1900 years ago. The idea of an engine without pistons that produces rotating motion directly was obviously attractive, and for very high speeds, conventional engines weren't much good. James Watt thought about making one, but realised that the technology was beyond the materials then available. It couldn't be done, he said, without God makes it possible for things to move 1,000 feet per second.
Now here I am in the kitchen at Hollin Hall. By 1884, Parsons reckoned that technology had moved on far enough that the steam turbine would actually be possible. He realised that if it was going to be at all efficient, it needed to run at very high speed. Now I'm going to generate some steam here, and the steam will come down this rubber tube, through these two rubber tubes, and out of these twin nozzles, and it should come out of there about 80 metres a second, about 150 miles an hour, even quicker than I am on my bike. And it'll bounce off these curved turbine blades, and as it bounces, it'll push the turbine forward that way. I don't want to get my finger in the steam, and that should spin the shaft, and with luck, that will spin this dynamo fast enough to light up this giant red searchlight back here. Now, here comes the first bits of steam. Well, it's blowing some water, there's water condensing. It's coming out of there, and I'm going to sit back a little bit. Beginning to turn. Oh, terrific. Now it's up to speed. I reckon this turbine is running at about 3,000 revolutions a minute. That means the shaft's turning about 50 times a second.
So he could get a turbine spinning very fast, but a lot of the steam's energy was wasted. He solved that problem on honeymoon. In the weeks after their honeymoon, the Parsons household was littered with models of turbines made out of old cotton reels and bits of stuck-on cardboard like this really. I've got a knitting needle for my shaft. And Parsons then had his great idea. He realised that if he had just one set of spinning blades, he could never get it to go fast enough to pull out all the energy out of the steam. But then he realised that didn't matter.
what he could do would put another set of blades behind it to pick up a bit more of the energy, and then another. In fact, he introduced the idea of multiple stages, and that is what made him famous and a hero. Now, if you look at this, you'll see that I've got 3 sets of rotating blades. 1, 2, 3. And in between them, there are 2 sets of fixed blades. And the reason for that is that when the air, he used steam, I'm using air, when the air hits the first one, it sends the air off at a funny angle. And you need the static blades to redirect the flow of the air. Now, let's just fit these into this tube to contain the wind, and then we'll see if we can get it to work.
Parsons said, in mechanical engineering, everything depends upon doing something. No machine ever reached moderate perfection by sheer thought. It is good to remember the crudeness and hopeless inefficiency of the first Parsons turbine. Everything was wrong about it, except the idea of multiple stages. But it taught the designer more than he would have discovered by meditation alone.
There we go. You can see it spinning round, and if you look from there, you can see that the 3 rotating blades are spinning, and the 2 static sets of blades are static.
In his 1884 patent, Parsons anticipated the idea of using a turbine to power a ship. In 1894, he put it into effect and built himself a little test rig, appropriately called the Turbinia. And here she is. She's recently been restored and is now the centrepiece of Newcastle's Discovery Museum. In 1897, there was a naval review to celebrate Queen Victoria's Diamond Jubilee, and he not only took Turbinia along, he created a sensation by breaking ranks and zooming up and down the fleet at enormous speed. The Navy's fastest destroyers could just manage 27 knots. The Turbinia could do 34. Suddenly, they were all out of date.
Now this is the main engine room, and it's quite cramped down here. It's just as well Parsons was a small chap, because he used to come down here and measure the output of the engines. This down here is the high-pressure turbine, steam coming in from under my feet. And then the steam would go back and into the intermediate pressure turbine, which is over there, and there's another low-pressure turbine under the back. And the one in the middle here is the reversing turbine, when they wanted to go astern.
Before long, Parsons turbines were driving not only the battleship Dreadnought, but also the big passenger liners. We don't all go on cruises, but we do use electricity. And generating electricity is where steam turbines made their biggest impact, many of the generators being made in the enormous factory that still bears the inventor's name.
I've come here to Station Road in Whitley Bay because my next hero ran a photographic business right here. Some of my heroes are inspired by the mysteries of nature and the universe. Others are inspired to expand the boundaries of science and technology, but this chap was inspired by a football match. He invented the windscreen wiper, and his name was Gladstone Adams.
Adams became an airborne photographer in the First World War. On one occasion, he came across the body of Manfred von Richthofen, the Red Baron, and helped to bury him.
In April 1908, Gladstone took 4 friends and his brothers Darroch to London to see the Cup final. Newcastle United against Wolverhampton Wanderers. Unfortunately, Wolves won 3-1, but there you go. On the way back, they ran into a blinding snowstorm, and their only device to deal with snow in those days was a hinge. They simply folded the windscreen down flat so it didn't get covered with snow. Unfortunately, they did get covered in snow, and he realised that was exactly the time they needed the windscreen most, and what they wanted was something to wipe the snow off. And he came up with this, a device to be operated by hand or foot, or intermittently by the motor, to clear the snow off the screen. This is a recreation of his first historic prototype windscreen wipers, and it's obviously just the thing for getting the snow off a 1904 Darroch windscreen. Well, it worked for a 1904 Darroch, but will it work for a 1996 bike? All I need is some rain. Rain! Rain! Oh, gosh, it's raining. Hey, look at that. It works. Terrific.
His patent covered various sorts of wiper, including single-bladed designs.
Before he was married, Gladstone Adams lived in the Rex Hotel, or rather in this building, which was something else then. And this is one of his prototype windscreen wipers. If you look, there's a rubber blade along the back of this piece of wood here. It's a bit old. And on this side, there's a piece of string. If I pull the string, the blade goes down, wiping the windscreen. And then it's supposed to spring up again. Unfortunately, this spring's come a bit loose in the intervening years, but if I help it a bit, you'll see it will spring up. So here we are. This is an original Gladstone Adams windscreen wiper. This is Team Valley, just outside Gateshead. And I've come here to celebrate a hero who didn't just see the light, he invented it. He invented the light bulb. His name was Joseph Swan.
Joseph Wilson Swan left school when he was 12 and was apprenticed to a firm of chemists. He invented several new processes for the developing photography business, but what interests me is the light bulb. By 1850, gas lighting had been around for 40 years and was getting quite common in shops and posh homes. But the trouble was it wasn't very much brighter than the old candles, and it was poisonous and smelly and a bit of a fire hazard. The invention of the gas mantle eventually improved gas lighting, but clearly the new electricity was the way to go. Now, the first sort of electric light that came along was the arc lamp, which was pioneered by Humphrey Davy about 1800. And here we are, two carbon electrodes, graphite here, and there's a low voltage across them, and when you touch them together, you get a spark. And when you hold them just apart, you can maintain that discharge. It's very fiddly because you need to have them about 0.5 millimetre apart all the time. Indeed, when they used these things in streetlights, they had a very complicated clockwork mechanism to maintain the separation of the electrodes. The problem with the arc light is that it's all or nothing. It's either on and fantastically bright or it's off completely. And that was fine for Dungeness Lighthouse, where they installed an arc light in 1862, but not much good for your living room because you'd be forever fiddling around with it and it was too bright to read by. So they obviously needed a better form of domestic lighting. About 1848, Swan saw a demonstration a bit like this. Here is a copper filament wound round and round and round and round into a coil, and when I connect it across a battery, you'll see that what happens is that it gets hot and it glows quite bright. Now obviously if you could get that a bit brighter still, it would make a useful lamp. It's not yet quite enough to read by, and the obvious thing is to connect it across a bigger battery. So I've got one here that is connected across a bigger battery, and let's see what happens to that. So again, here's a copper coil wound round and round and round, and here's a bigger battery, and when I connect it up, well, it gets very bright, but it burns out. Here at Underhill in Gateshead, Swan set about the problem of the burning filaments. This is the conservatory at Underhill, where Joseph Swan did a lot of his crucial experiments, leading to the formation of the first successful electric light. And this is a replica of his first light, which he demonstrated before 700 people at the Newcastle upon Tyne Literary and Philosophical Society on the 3rd of February 1879. Now you can see what he's done. He's encased his carbon filament in the middle there in a glass bulb, and he's pumped all the air out of the bulb so the carbon doesn't burn up. But in fact, he was even more cunning than that, and as the dusk falls on this famous conservatory, I'll show you what I mean. Now, pumping out the air seemed pretty obvious, but in fact it didn't work, because he pumped out the air and switched on his filament, and it still burnt out. And the problem was that there was some air stuck actually on the filament. And so what he had to do to get around that was to pump out all the air that he could, and then heat the filament very gently to drive off the air that had been stuck on it and keep pumping. And that way he got rid of all the air, and then he made a successful light bulb. Now I'm going to light my own homemade bulbs in this conservatory to light it up and try and recreate the sort of elation that Swan must have felt when he got his first bulbs to work in this very room. And the way I'm getting rid of my air is putting liquid nitrogen in the bottom, and once it's stopped boiling, it will have pushed all the air out, and with luck, that'll have only nitrogen there, and the filaments won't burn out. Now, Swan patented his degassing process, but he didn't bother to patent the filament lamp. It was too obvious. I mean, look at that, it's working, not burning out yet.
People have been trying to make filament lamps for 40 years. There was no point in patenting it now. But he reckoned without the loudmouthed American Thomas Alva Edison, who some American books claim invented absolutely everything, including the lamp.
Edison had been working on carbon filaments made by burning bamboo. One cartload from Japan supplied his works for a year. Swan had abandoned natural materials because they were too inconsistent, and instead made entirely artificial filaments from cellulose. It was the first artificial fibre, and he got his wife to crochet it into doilies. But if Swan had the better filaments, Edison had the better patent.
In 1881, Swan opened a factory in Benwell in Newcastle and started manufacturing light bulbs and selling them. And then Edison got all hot under the collar and said, "You're infringing my patent." But in the end, they buried the hatchet and formed the Edison-Swan United Electric Light Company, and we've all been lit happily ever after, thanks to the persistence and brilliance of Joseph Wilson Swan.
In the year 1711, my next hero was born right here in Byers Green near Bishop Auckland. He was apprenticed to a watchmaker but ran away to sea. Not a very promising start really, but he went on miles ahead of his time to sort out the mysteries of the Milky Way, Saturn's rings and our place in the universe. He was Thomas Wright. On his return from the sea, Thomas Wright somehow set himself up as head of a mathematical school in Sunderland. He must have become well respected because the Empress Catherine the Great of Russia asked him to become Professor of Navigation at the Imperial Academy of St. Petersburg. He said, "No thanks." In the village of Westerton, he built what was supposed to have become his observatory and is now known as Wright's Folly. In 1750, he published a pretty ambitious book which was entitled An Original Theory or Hypothesis of the Universe, and it went on for pages and pages, and then it said, and in particular the Via Lactea, that's the Milky Way. The book consists of 9 long letters to a sceptical friend. He tries to convince his friend that the stars are all suns, and that if the Creator is infinitely great, then surely the universe must be infinitely large to reflect this. Now, reading his book, it's quite hard to disentangle his theories from all the other ones he quotes. He quotes Huygens and Newton and so on. But one of the neatest things is the way he describes the Milky Way. Now, the Milky Way is the huge band of stars across the night sky. Well, it's a sort of very faint, cloudy band. And he reckoned that we must be in the middle of a great sort of disk of stars. If you imagine the whole of this scone as a disk and we're in the middle, then obviously if you look up, you'll see a lot more currents, that's stars, or if you look down, the Earth's in the way, than if you look sideways. And that's how he explained the Milky Way. And as far as I know, he was the first person to say we were in the middle of an enormous galaxy of stars. In other words, the Milky Way appears milky just because we see more of the stars in our galaxy when we look upwards. The idea that the Earth is part of a disc-shaped galaxy, which is the Milky Way, must have been very startling in the 18th century. So I'd like to salute Thomas Wright, the first man who really put us in our place. I've come here to the remains of the Gables, Elsick Road, Newcastle, because it was the birthplace of an extraordinary man who managed to apply mathematics to parsnips, icebergs and the atmosphere. His name was Lewis Fry Richardson. Lewis's family were Quakers, and his beliefs strongly affected his science because he refused to allow his research to be used for military purposes. In April 1912, Lewis went on holiday with his wife Dorothy to the Isle of Wight, and while he was there he heard about the Titanic disaster. She hit an iceberg in thick fog and went down with 1,500 people, and then and there he invented a new way of looking for icebergs in the fog, so quickly in fact that he filed a patent application within 5 days of the disaster. Now, before then, what they'd done looking for icebergs was to use a foghorn like this. And you can hear the echo coming back off that ship over there, but clearly they hadn't been able to hear the echoes coming back off the icebergs, or maybe they weren't using foghorns on the Titanic that night. His idea was to use a higher frequency, a whistle, and a stopwatch, and
and a golf umbrella. He called this his search sound. The idea is he was going to blow a whistle, listen for the echo coming back and focus it. Use this to focus the sound on his ear. Then he'd be able to hear even a very faint echo. That was rather good. I've got 0.40 of a second. That means that sound travels 300 meters in 1 second, 120 meters in 0.40 of a second, so that's gone there and back, so that ship should be 60 meters away. Well, it isn't 60 meters away. I think I'm probably getting a reflection from the building behind, which is rather bigger than the ship. I'll just try it again and see if I can hear the reflection from the ship itself. So.
Finding myself on the banks of the Tyne, I couldn't resist the chance to repeat Richardson's important experiment to measure the angular separation of parsnips. Lewis Richardson pioneered the application of maths to messy problems in the real world, and then devised brilliantly simple ways to put his ideas into practice.
4 degrees. 1, 2, 3.
He was interested in how water flows, and he needed to measure the separation of two floats in a stream.
6 degrees.
After endless experimentation, he reckoned the combination of shape and density made the parsnip hydrodynamically perfect.
8 degrees.
Richardson's pacifism led to an attempt to model the causes of war, but the work he is best known for is the mathematics of the weather. He realized the key to forecasting was to study the root causes of the world's weather conditions.
Hello, danger! Missiles may fall, keep off!
He started to quantify atmospheric conditions such as temperature, turbulence, and wind speed.
Richardson was very interested in measuring the wind speed, not just on the ground. Anyone can measure the wind speed on the ground with an anemometer. And some people tried to measure the wind speed high up by watching the drift of weather balloons. But that wasn't much good if it was cloudy or foggy. So what he did was to take a tin hut with a hole in the roof and fire bullets straight upwards to see how far they were blown by the wind. He fired 3 different sizes of bullets, the size of lentils, cherries and peas, and he also mixed his own gunpowder and made different sized charges so they would go higher. I can make my tennis balls go higher just like that. And a very interesting thing happens. When I was firing them just low, they were coming down about here, which means that the wind was blowing from just about there. But now they're going much higher and the wind's coming from over that direction. With a bit of mathematics, you could work out the precise wind speed at all different heights. He stipulated that before you started firing, you should call out the warning. Hello, danger, bullets may fall, keep off.
Eventually, he could predict the next day's weather, but without computers, the calculations took 3 months.
Sorry, that's all the heroes for this week. See you next time.
And that'll be at the same time next Monday on BBC Two. Chaos and mayhem are just about to hit BBC One with another visit to the British Empire.